morning. Thanks a lot for the great intro. By the way, I still got the badge that says I'm still with Miro, and Andrei, the CEO, was really excited about that, the additional advertising. But let's talk about strategy. It's really exciting to talk about strategy because it's so close to me as a topic and seems like to many of you now. Let's get into that. First of all, this is something that I received as a piece of research from the PMF, and 60% of PMs want to learn more about how to build a good product strategy. And this is not surprising, since by being a strategic thinker, PM can be much more impactful in their organization. In fact, behaviors associated with strategic thinking are, for example, 10 times more important for the perception of effectiveness in the organization. I've tried many frameworks myself in various organizations, and what I notice is that teams tend to approach product strategy as a one-time exercise. They spend a lot of time preparing for the strategy and then running a big meeting and then putting the strategy on the shelf to collect dust. At the same time, strategy can be much more valuable if it's approached as a living document. And the trick here is to focus on the most valuable components of that and not on everything. And the 4 components that I will be talking about today are these. The first one is the success criteria definition, the goals for the product. Then you go into the current context overview, which is the current state where you are as a product now. With that, you will be able to define the big bets, the initiatives map as well. And those are the most dynamic parts of the strategy. So teams need to be really aligned and constantly updating those elements so that the strategy stays as a living document instead of being put on shelf. And before I begin, I ask you to do this one exercise, which is a little bit of dynamic so that we get wake up this morning and really get engaged. Scan the QR code, go to menti.com and answer this one question candidly. How would you rate yourself with product strategy? And while you do so, a little bit about how I came to product management in the first place. And some of you can call this path as classic. I used to be a software developer, but for a very short time, maybe for 6 months or so, I quickly understood that I wanted to be closer to the business. So I became a team lead and then also the unofficial product manager in the same team. I co-founded, as Liam mentioned, a couple of startups in my home region. One became successful, many failed. And I was fortunate enough to work at some of the greatest companies, Booking.com, Miro, and now PVCase. And with Miro specifically, I spent there 3+ years. And I joined just the beginning of pandemic, in time to experience the tremendous growth of the company. Just imagine, the company user base grew by around 9 times, and the headcount grew by around the same number. It was exciting. It was really, really energizing. But at the same time, we faced multiple challenges. With such a big team now, located all across different hubs, teams started taking much more time to make decisions. It was really hard for them to align on decisions aimed for the progress on the initiatives and the goals. So it was clear for us that the teams needed good guardrails, the vision and the strategy. And now I'm in the same context with PVCase. So I went back to a company that was in the stage of Miro in 2020, because that's what I like. And PVCase specifically is a software, but more for industrial engineers to help them build huge and more effective and productive solar parks. So it saves days and sometimes even weeks for those industrial engineers. And you can think of that as Figma, but Figma for usual software designers, and here PVCase is for designers, but on the solar parks designers. Last month only, with software, we created 160 gigawatt of capacity with PVCase, and it's the same as the whole capacity for Germany. As I mentioned, my experience with product management is a mix of success and failure. I was personally in situations when there was either no or poor product strategy. So my product teams would constantly lurch from one sales opportunity to another and trying to support the deals as they would emerge. So product would go into completely different directions, resulting in zero or sometimes even negative impact for the business. How many of us here were in these situations in their organizations? Yeah, quite many. And by the way, I ask you to answer one question. I want to understand the average response rate here. I will let you know how is it. So 48% grade themselves as 3 out of 5, which is, I'm decent, but I want to learn more. So that's a good sweet spot, but frankly speaking, I was expecting that as this group is product management group, it would be on the higher side. But what is product strategy in the first place? It's a high-level plan describing what the company wants to accomplish with its product and how it wants to do that. It sounds easy on paper, but in reality, it's a little bit more complicated. Why you want to invest into product strategy? So that's something that a designer actually from Miro was shared with me. It was a hint, and I think apart from allowing you to ask more why questions, why would it be important to invest into product strategy? So pragmatically, as I mentioned, it's one of the core elements for the product manager to grow in the company, how they can bring more impact. This is quite famous product leader Canyon. Many of you already saw that. And it really illustrates well what it takes to grow into product leadership positions. And companies tend to list the competencies related to strategic thinking, ranging from developing, communicating, executing, contributing to strategies. And probably many of you have similar competencies in your organizations. But apart from allowing you to grow pragmatically as a product manager, it also allows you to step back and think where you are now and what you can do to bring even more value for the business. It's a great way to communicate your vision and therefore an amazing way to build trust with leadership, with your team, and with any stakeholders. And with your team specifically, it brings focus. They know what they are doing and why. They have an item in the backlog, and they don't usually understand what the broader vision, how it contributes to the company's success, but with the strategy, it's all absolutely possible. And finally, it allows you to say no, and say no a lot. So with so many benefits, why would it be so rare that companies have a good product strategy? In the first place, I would say the very common thing is that there is just no investment in the product strategy at all. And really frequently they say, we move too fast. We are in a fast-paced environment. We cannot spend time on strategy, or it becomes too absolute too soon. Or it becomes too detailed or too broad, with too broad being just get to 25 million ARR next year, which is a goal but not a strategy. And finally, if you are a product manager having a product strategy, but it's based on your assumptions and opinion, it's really hard to get buy-in for your vision if you don't build the trust around that. So with all of that, it leads to the following. It's quite famous quote from Lewis Carroll. If you don't know where you're going, then any road will lead you there. All right. So you want to create a product strategy, right? And that's why you're all here. How do you start? Well, there are a bunch of frameworks out there that you can try. I have tried many of those, and almost always they are quite valuable, almost. But as you can imagine, there is no golden framework that will allow you to support any context. So I don't want to spend time on the frameworks, and instead I want to share something that works based on my experience and something that can be applicable to almost always all kind of context. To begin, strategy is not a one-man game. It's a team exercise. And there are multiple reasons for that. First, you want to involve people early because you want to get their buy-in. And second, which I try to use myself as much as possible, is to simply co-create. Instead of doing all by yourself, why not involve a UX researcher, designer, business person to take ownership of respective pieces? So you have to do less work. Involving an advisor is really valuable. It's optional, but it's highly, highly beneficial. In my experience, it can be someone in your organization who have done many strategies. They learned a lot. It can be a former consultant. It can be a product leader. It can be a PM who is really good with strategies. So someone who can challenge you, someone who can give you feedback, someone who can help you drive and create a strategy that will be valuable. All right, now you want to create a strategy, you have people to support you, you involve them early. I want you to think about product strategy as a story about your product. And this story would have these 4 elements that represent 80% of value of your strategy. The story starts with what success looks like. This is the product goals. And product goals evolve as the company context changes, as you learn new things. I give you an example here of imaginary messaging app. And for example, next year we want to focus on activation and aha moment. The key 3 elements of good product goals are you connect them to company goals so that the team understands really well what their work contributes to the overall success of the company. They also have easy and clear understanding of the metrics. And finally, the goals are non-ambiguously measurable, providing good feedback system for the product team that is responsible for those metrics. So with that, you go into the most heavy part of your strategy, which is the overview of the context. That's where you will spend most of your time creating that and doing research and analysis. So that's where, when I was listening to all the talks about Gen AI, that could be a great way to apply Gen AI to simplify your work on the strategy. Because here, I believe without Gen AI, you can involve people. As I mentioned, UX researcher, designer, business people, any other PMs who can support you. Because you don't want to do data analysis yourself. You don't want to do user research yourself. You want to collaborate with other people. And Gen AI can be a really useful tool to support and simplify work. I generally break down context into 2 parts. One is you can think of bottom-up, and another one is top-down. So on the bottom-up, I talked about that already, data analysis, insights, and customer interviews and so on. Top-down is something that you absolutely cannot avoid. And if you avoid, most probably you will have to adjust your strategy later on. What are the company priorities you have to support? It's not usually a lot. It can be AI to support. One of the company priorities, we want to be better or at least invest into AI so that we know how it applies to our company in the next year. How do you support that in your strategy for the 2024? It can look like that in the end, in a simplified form. It's overview of the user journey and also identification of the most challenging parts of the user journey. So that you can prioritize the most critical elements to support with your strategy. So that's the foundation for you to identify the big bets. And the big bets are two to three areas of investment. I recently read this book called Storyworthy, amazing book if you want to learn about storytelling, quite amusing as well. And in this book, there is a notion of 5-second moment. 5-second moment of your story as a core of it. So here, big bets is your 5-second moment. It's a short part of the strategy, but it's the core of it. That's where you realize what you will be investing in. What are the 2-3 investment areas? But you need obviously to build up to that with current context and the success criteria. The big bets should and must connect to the company goals. So that's where you say, by investing into these 2 bets, I contribute to the company goal of growing engagement with our app, and we will get to aha moment of this percentage next year. With that, what is left is some kind of glimpse into tactics, because you gave as a story overview of where you are now, the problems that you are facing, and what you believe are some of the important areas for investment. Roadmap could be one way to do that. And let me know if you have created roadmaps in your organizations and it was. Can you also raise your hand if it was valuable and easy exercise? Yes. You are the one? Let's talk about that after the talk. Here, I advise not to create a roadmap, but it's close to that. Initiatives map is not something where you are committing to dates. You are not committing to any solutions. You are not committing to any opportunities. Instead, initiatives map is a glimpse into tactics. It's ever-evolving list of initiatives that potentially you will be working on that directly contribute to the big bets. And it could look like that. I tend to use this now, next, and future approach, where you break down initiatives into 3 buckets, depending on the level of confidence and validation of your initiatives. So the now bucket is where you generally already working on those initiatives. They're already scoped, they're already discovered, and you know approximately when they will finish. The next bucket is something that you will start working on as soon as the now bucket is finished. And you're now discovering and validating the initiatives. At the same time, you don't know when you will be finishing. So you're not committing to any dates to deliver those initiatives. And then the future bucket is something that you yet to start validating and scoping. So you don't know when you will start and you don't know when you will finish those. And this is it, your product strategy, your story, with 4 main elements. Success criteria, the overview of the context, the big bets, and then the overview of the initiatives. The good news is that you have the story. The not so good news is that you still need to communicate this story, because it's half of the value that you can bring with the strategy. And given that communication is a separate topic by itself, I will just do a quick version of that. Your strategy is your story, so I will frame my learnings using the 7 principles of communication from Robert Cialdini. The first one being reciprocity. So think about the PM with whom you engage early. What are the win-win situations that you can identify and include in this strategy? The second one is scarcity. Really applicable and useful when you are about to invest into a new area. So to your manager, to your leadership, you can communicate the cost of not investing into that. The authority is a key for me. That's where you know that there are 2-3 people in your organization that other team members listen to. So who are those people? can you get them on board from the beginning? And ideally, can you make them ambassadors so that they communicate your strategy on your behalf? That's the ideal scenario. The consistency is all about avoiding communicating the strategy as a big meeting and then putting it on the shelf. And the best scenario is that you come to this meeting and then most of people see the strategy for the first time. So you see, they face a lot of surprise. They have a lot of questions. They challenge you. The better approach is when most of people already know what you're going to be talking about. So there are only a few people who haven't seen that. So you have the majority of people who already support you. And the liking is all about building relationships and doing that early. Social proof is something that is useful in the current context evaluation. Can you include examples from other companies? Can you include quotes from customers? And then the unity is all about making it we exercise instead of I exercise. All right, we have talked a lot about a lot today, and I want to just give 3 extra tips, smaller tips, more tactical. The first one being shorter versions. I've been with Miro and I've talked to many, many organizations, and most of organizations live in the hybrid world. With hybrid world, it's hard to have this even one big meeting presentation. So you want to have a version that you can share over Slack. Do you have a version that you can talk about during the coffee break? Do you have a version to talk about during, a Lyft conversation with your CEO? So that's all about having a better way and more concise way to communicate your strategy. Then the usage of data, I already touched upon. And only one piece here is don't go for analysis paralysis. Avoid that. And generally, you will have data analytics person who will try to come up with ideal scenario. Instead, come up with something that is good enough. Good enough is enough. You will iterate. And finally, make it serve you. Is there a way for you to have strategy as information used in OKRs? OKRs are easily defined if you have a good strategy. The final thought is, as you've noticed, there is a lot of dot connection. And I think that's the core work and responsibility of a PM is to connect the dots, seeing all the ambiguity in the organization and remove that. So with strategy, you create a big picture, you identify the big investment areas, and you give overview into tactics. That's what I want to leave you with. Connect the dots, create valuable strategies. Thank you.